Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Plant Breeding Center seminar series. So where we're focusing on international plant breeding. This seminar series is sponsored by Dr. Jim Luby and Dr. Emily Hoover in honor of Second Harvest Heartland. Today it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, all the way from Florida, Dr. Joe DeVries. He is technically retired now, but I think he's going to show us that he's not actually retired. So he's, since 1986, has worked across Africa on crop improvement, seed systems, and food security. He is the founder and former president of Seed Systems Group, which we're going to be hearing quite a bit about today. And I'm going to let him tell you his life story as opposed to me telling it, because I'll do a very poor job. So join me in welcoming Joe.
Thank you, Sarah and Rex and everyone I've met so far. It's been a pleasure to be back in Minnesota. I'll be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time in Minnesota across my life, but it was my uncle's farm in southern Minnesota that I visited as a kid that first got me fascinated with agriculture. And so it is great to be back here. And I'm aware as well that I'm on sacred ground, visiting the alma mater of my previous mentor and colleague, Norman Borlaug. Well, thank you for coming to this seminar. I hope I'll say some things that you find interesting and maybe inspiring. People often ask me how I ever got involved with the work that I do or have been doing for the past 40 years. It was at a seminar at a university at a small Presbyterian college in the mountains of North Carolina. And I was sitting in the back at one point with no real plan for my life, to be honest, at that stage. And there was a visiting missionary from the Presbyterian church, and he lived in Brazil. And at the end of his talk, he said, "How many students are here in this hall this morning?" And somebody down front said, "Oh, there's about 300 of us." And he said, "Well, if there's 300 students in this hall this morning, I'd be surprised if there wasn't at least one who was meant to go out and make the world a better place." And I had been daydreaming the whole time he talked. I don't even know what he said. But when he said that, I knew he was talking about me. I don't know why. It was like a lightning bolt from above. And yeah, I jumped up and discovered that there was a giant world out there, and I wanted to go out and try to do something. So I started in Haiti, and then eventually went to work for the United Nations in Africa. But my talk today is really about the power of agricultural technologies to transform lives of people who are still struggling to feed themselves and their families and their communities. So I'll get right to it. As Sarah has said, I'm the founder of an organization known as Seed Systems Group. And our focus is really on the first and most crucial technology farmers who are in traditional production systems and struggling to make ends meet, probably at subsistence or maybe something above or slightly below subsistence levels of production, get going to become small semi-commercial producers, people who could be counted on to produce a surplus and help feed their countries. And that crucial technology across all continents and nowhere best embodied than in the work of Norman Borlaug is the seed. And, you know, it's those gene codes in the DNA of the seed that allow a crop to either make efficient or inefficient use of sunlight, water, and nutrient to produce a crop and determine what the farmer takes home at the end of her or his season. So that's, here's my presentation outline anyway. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of seed in the perspective on seed in the US and also internationally. We'll talk about the systems approach to getting better seed to farmers sustainably, not as a handout, but as a function of their economy and the markets that they interact with. the role of my organization in that struggle to feed Africa, and then some of the lessons that we've learned. I don't know how you normally run these sessions, whether it's interactive or you just have a Q&A at the end. I'll just open it up to anybody who wants to shout out a question. Let's be spontaneous and get a conversation going. So on the role of seed, why I first went to Africa as more or less an irrigation engineer. I wasn't a trained engineer, but I was called on to build irrigation schemes in the Sahel region after the major drought in 84, 85. I mean, that sounds like a whole century ago to some of the students here, I realize. But We Are the World, you ever hear this song? You know, they raised a lot of money to respond to a massive drought across West and all the way across the Sahel region into Ethiopia. And I was part of a team of people that went out under the United Nations to build irrigation schemes. But when I went to my second assignment in Africa was really in Mozambique during a war period. And that's where I discovered that new seed can actually transform farmers' lives. And that led to this period of my career with AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, which I co-founded with my colleagues at the Gates Foundation and Rockefeller Foundations. And what we learned over the first period of the year 2000, this century, was that as seed supply increased in Uganda and Ethiopia and another country, several other countries that we were working in, Kenya as well, so did yields. As farmers got access to better seed, national yields, which is not an easy thing to do in anyone's lifetime, to budge that needle on yields, and those are the purple lines you see here. We virtually doubled maize yields in Uganda and almost tripled maize yields in Ethiopia. And those trends that were started in the early 2000s have continued on up until today. Later on, after we'd had the opportunity to work in a number of countries, 10 or 12 or 15 countries, with Gates and Rockefeller funding to build seed production and supply systems, we compared 10 countries we had worked in, and those are the ones represented by this green graph line here, to 10 other similar countries that had never had that kind of intervention. And that's the kind of contrast that we got. So we felt pretty emboldened that, you know, just putting seed out there and putting it for sale among local farmers was the key intervention. And then, of course, it's never just the seed. Seed is not magic. Well, it's kind of magic, but you know, it's really the resources you put on the crop and the management practices that farmers tend to add when they have a productive crop, but don't bring to the crop if they know they're only going to get a subsistence level of yield. Does that make sense so far? We'll get a bit more into it. That's why we focus on seed systems. And I like to remind people who are in a US setting that similar trends took place in the US after the introduction of hybrid maize seed. And this is a graph published by Purdue University, who's been, you know, careful enough to gather this data on an annual basis. And these are yield trends in the US up to present day, from about 1865, so the end of the Civil War, right? And as you can see, we were flatlining here in the US. And it wasn't like we weren't trying to do things to improve agricultural productivity. We had the Morrill Act that founded the land-grant universities, one of which we're standing in right now. We had the Hatch Act, which established the Agricultural Research Service of US Department of Agriculture. And then in the early 1910s, we had the Smith-Lever Act, which established the US Extension Service. And look at what happened to yields of maize in the US. Nothing. We were stuck right here in bushels per acre. I still don't understand US measurements, but I've made the conversion into something people can understand, and that's about 1.5 metric tons. That was about the yield of a subsistence farmer in Africa when we started the programs on seed systems development. So we were not doing well. And what made the difference if I click one last time, was here, boom. When Henry Wallace, just down the road there in Iowa, established Pioneer Hybrid Seed Company and started introducing hybrid maize seed. And this was the phase of growth when we were depending on double cross hybrids. And this is the kind of growth we started on after the introduction of single cross hybrids. So as you can see, without better seed in America, we would not have had our own green revolution and would not have had the idea as well later that to go out and try to help the world feed itself. So I want to remind us all today, I think it's very timely to make the point that the US has historically been the society that took this science and breakthroughs in how to feed populations to the rest of the world. Starting with, like I already mentioned, Henry Wallace, who under Roosevelt in the 40s went down to Mexico and was appalled at the condition farmers were farming in there, came back and called up his friend, Elvin Stakeman, here at the University of Minnesota and said, hey, we've got a problem down in Mexico. We need to do something down there. And Wallace at that time had gone on from being the founder of Pioneer Seed Company to being Secretary of Agriculture and eventually Vice President. He was Vice President-elect when he visited Mexico. And Stakeman said, I've got just the guy for you. And that was Norman Borlaug, who at that time was working at DuPont, Pioneer. And Borlaug made an enormous contribution in the productivity of wheat in Mexico and then in Asia, subcontinent of India and Pakistan and around the world. And that stretches from the 20s and 30s up to the 50s and 60s. And then the CGIAR was founded in the early 60s up to 70s. USAID became a strong force. And USAID doesn't exist anymore. We're not doing any of this. As of today, the United States is not lending any assistance anywhere in the world to help the world feed itself. So it's the end of an amazing legacy. Thankfully, in the early 2000s, Bill Gates and Melinda Gates and Kofi Annan put out a tremendous amount of money to help carry that work forward. And as well, the organization I worked with at that time was the Rockefeller Foundation. We teamed up to then create the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. So this is something that's part of our DNA. For us to abandon this mission of helping the world feed itself, I think would be completely misguided, and I hope we get back on track soon. Because if you look around, the number of people in the world who are really concerned with how the world feeds itself is very small in number. I've been privileged through the support given by a number of donors to have interacted with those individuals, including the late, great Norman Borlaug, who was a lifelong staff member at the Rockefeller Foundation, where I spent 12 years, as well as Kofi Annan, who had a vision. Kofi Annan was, for those of you who don't remember, was the Secretary General of the United Nations for 10 years, and then went on to establish his own foundation and served as our first chairperson at the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Anyway, it's also good to remember that if the wolf is always at the door, with regard to our ability to feed itself. And famine has been a recurring phenomenon in human society since our origins. I mentioned the famine across Ethiopia and the Sahel in the 1980s, and then later on in protracted civil conflicts in Mozambique and Angola, there was famine as well. I know because I was in Mozambique and I took that photo in 1990 of famine-stricken children. It's hard to look at, but I think we have to remind ourselves that we don't have stockpiles around the world to feed ourselves if agriculture doesn't do the job year in and year out. Now, I've talked a lot about international agriculture development, But for any of you who are contemplating a career in this field, I think it's worth me pointing out that it is a field fraught with its own political economy, let's say. And the way I like to depict it is kind of like this. You start out with a big pot of money, and you might hear about the World Bank making a massive loan to country X or Y. But the amount of that money that actually gets down to the battlefield where the food is being produced down here tends to be precious little. And you can have a great career in administration. You can have a great career as a researcher. And you can also do a lot of publications, etc. And a select few will probably get into the field of breeding. But as you get down from that original investment, you'll find that very little is actually getting to the farmer. And the biggest problem that I've personally struggled with in my career is this transition from a breeder to the seed producer. Here in the US, we really had the system that public-private cooperation from the start. It's not been an obvious trend in other parts of the world, okay? So to transition from a public breeding source into private seed production and making it available to a farmer has been a real struggle. And that's kind of where my career ended up being focused. I originally went after I got into my breeding career, I went as a breeder and bred a new generation of hybrid maize varieties for Kenya. But as I looked around, and as I look around still today, the problem is no longer breeding. We've made it great for breeders, and there's been a huge number of new varieties developed, but so many of them are still remaining on the shelf. So think about that. If you want to be really in an influential position in terms of feeding the world, if you can make that transition between breeding and seed production, you'll have much more impact rather than just remaining as a breeder. And some of the conversations I've had last evening and this morning were all about that. So I'm glad people here at the University of Minnesota are aware of it. Rex was talking about it, and Sarah as well. So as we know, historically, Africa has been at the bottom in terms of crop yields. This is Africa's line here. And for a long time, you didn't see much change, just kind of incremental change. But then over recent decades, there has been an encouraging, response. And it's not really become part of conventional wisdom that Africa had a green revolution. But I'm here to say it has. It is in process right now, but it is incomplete. The first major breakthrough, as I've already mentioned, was huge outlay of funds for breeding. Africa, is not a big wheat producer. It's a fairly large rice producer. But its main green revolution crop, if you will, is definitely going to be maize because it is being cultivated throughout the continent wherever there's sufficient moisture. Sorghum is largely giving way to maize production in large parts of the continent. But across all these crops, Bill Gates, the Rockefeller Foundation, my own organization at the time, AGRA, pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into breeding. And we now have improved varieties for virtually every food crop, for almost every agroecology in Africa. Major breakthrough. And how does that play out? Well, if you're a breeder and you're interested in these kind of things, I can name some of the traits that we worked on. I personally was involved with these stress-tolerant hybrid maize varieties with resistance to maize streak virus. We've largely whipped maize streak virus right now. Hallelujah. It was a scourge across the whole continent. Triscum leaf blight, rust, Cercospora, that's GLS, for those of you who know maize. But in rice, yellow mottle virus was a big problem. Bacterial blight continues to be in some areas. In sorghum, anthracnose and alternaria, aspergillus, and head bugs, and the molds associated with panicle rots, seed rots, have have been addressed through breeding. In peanut or groundnut, Cercospora leaf spot and rosette virus have been huge problems. They are being developed. They are now under management through post-plant resistance. African cassava, it's been the brown streak virus and cassava mosaic virus. Beans, same story, mainly foliar diseases. And I've got some, etc. And so I've got some photos over here that depict what this meant in terms of crop phenotype. And so this, just to pick on sorghum for a while, that's a Guinea landrace of sorghum in Mali. And I think you can see, those are the panicles up there. Wispy little things on long branches, and a tremendous amount of biomass caught up in the stem. That is a hybrid, sort of intermediate Guinea caudatum type sorghum variety that we developed in Mali through some funding from Rockefeller Foundation. And you can see the huge advantage in terms of harvest index in this hybrid, right? And some people might say, oh, but you're messing with the crop, and now the farmer doesn't have enough stover for their cattle or livestock. But the truth is, the digestibility of the stem in this variety turned out to be way higher than it is in the 4 meter tall variety. So the farmer was happy on both levels. This is the groundnut or this peanut that I mentioned earlier. And here's the farmer's variety that he's been growing, all eaten up with Cercospora and rosette virus. This is the new variety. And that's the breeder right back there, David Okello. And I've always known when a breeder in Africa feels like they've done the job, they kind of stand like that. And he's just kind of appreciating how it all played out. Here's some bean varieties, same kind of thing, a comparison between the improved varieties developed by that gentleman right there, Augustine Musoni. And these are my colleagues, George Bagheera and Jane Aninda. And this is the local Czech. And you don't see a single pod. I mean, it's just completely eaten up with foliar diseases, right? And look at the difference there in the same environment. And you don't even have to go to a climbing bee to get double, triple your yield. Think of what that means to a farmer. Last but least, maize. This is a civet hybrid growing in the southern highlands of Tanzania. That's the farmer, and that's the landrace she cultivated her whole life. And you can see, she can't really see well, but she's not a young woman. But that was the first time she'd ever grown. That was one plot, one small pack, 50 grams of seed that she planted on her farm to compare with her variety. And I asked her after we visited that plot, what are you going to do now? And she said, oh, I'm going to buy this hybrid seed. I said, well, where are you going to get the money? She said, oh, that's not a problem. I'll sell a goat. I'll sell some chickens. I said, well, how do you know which variety to buy? And she took me over to her house where she had taken a nail and scratched into the brick. I used to have a slide of this, the name of that hybrid. She said, I know, that's the one I'm going to buy. And that hybrid is now being produced by our colleague, Chacha Ngorio, through a company called Mero Agro. And he's producing about 10,000 tons of that hybrid seed annually in Tanzania today. So yeah, the green revolution has taken place in parts of Africa. Okay, I want to talk about the second major breakthrough, the one I'm truly excited about these days, because I feel like it has application, not just in Africa, but in parts of the Western hemisphere as well, where we still don't have the essential levels of productivity needed to assure food security. And these are the 4 steps. If you ask Joe DeVries how it works on the ground, you got to start with your breeding. And public breeding is a wonderful thing, and we hope it never dies out because we need open source innovation for genetic improvement of crops. But then you switch gears quickly and in a very determined fashion to private seed companies. And the original purveyors of improved seed in the United States were mom and pop startup seed companies. We weren't always endowed with the Bayers and the Cortevas and the Dows, et cetera, right? They started out as family businesses collaborating with their land-grant university coming home with some seed in their pocket to start growing out and selling to farmers. And that's exactly what we're doing in Africa. We're identifying entrepreneurs who can run a company, can run a seed business, and grow their business year on year to fill in the gap between farmers who have access and those who don't have access to seed. So public breeders sometimes are a bit precious and they want to move around in their pristine research environments. I'm telling them every chance I get, you'll never have any impact. And I was in the same mode when I first came out with the first couple of releases of hybrid maize in Kenya. I was kind of one of those guys who thought maybe I'll drive around with a couple of bags of seed in my pickup and share it with the farmers along the side of the road. Well, thankfully, we got our eyes open by exposure to private seed business and realized that's where we really need to make the biggest investment. But then again, you know, all of this happens on research stations and contracted field plots, right? The seed production doesn't really involve the massive farmers out there. How are you going to get them aware that there's a new alternative? And that is all about farmer awareness. So you've got to have an intervention in this area as well. And then finally, a little known but an underappreciated component of this whole value chain is the vendor, the local mom and seed and feed shop that sits in the middle of a market in African towns or villages selling seed as a business. And I'll elaborate on this. And what we've always said from the beginning is, you don't have to do it for every farmer. You just need to introduce this public-private seed system, and at the critical stage where yields are probably around 1 ton per hectare, and if you can get to 3 tons per hectare average and 30% adoption of better technology, the market will do the rest. You literally can walk away because it's a tipping point that's reached, and you know, it's gone viral, and farmers who don't have the seed know they need it, and they're going to find it, and you will lift yield levels and productivity and profitability among those farmers across the country. So a bit more on the breeding. You know, people ask me, how much did biotech contribute to the successes you've seen in Africa? I say, well, until maybe the past 10 years when, you know, molecular breeding has become more proficient, it didn't help at all because GM crop varieties are banned in almost all of Africa. What really made the difference for breeders was inviting farmers onto their plots to get the farmer to make the choice, an informed choice. And that's depicted in this slide here where the breeder in Eastern Congo has invited these farmers onto the field to select the best climbing bean variety. It's a hugely important crop in that area around Lake Kivu. So, you know, narrow the breeding focus when you have diverse environments. You can't go immediately for a broad adaptation. That's a debate a lot of people have engaged in the past. These are gender balanced selection methods. That was the women's point at which they went out and tagged the ones they liked the best. And then we invite the men in and we get a balance of views that way. If not, if you invite them in both at the same time, men tend to dominate and say, oh no, this is it. This is the one. And that might not be the criteria that the woman would have chosen. So you need to have gender balance. It needs to be, you need to test these under farmer relevant conditions, and then you will almost eliminate, but not entirely, the chance of releasing unadapted or unappreciated varieties. I talked already about the importance of small and medium-sized African seed companies. I think it's a no-brainer. Governments don't run good bakeries or mattress factories, and they don't run good seed companies either. In Africa, seed was a monopoly held by the government for up until the 1990s in almost every country that I can think of. The exception probably being South Africa. The liberalization of that sector has led to now entrepreneurs spilling into that space, but it was slow. And it still needs a lot of pushing in the countries that have not experienced a seed revolution. But you can't say enough about the private entrepreneur who's going to manage all that from production to, even management and stocking of germplasm in cold store, in a tropical environment, in a humid environment, and managing a processing unit and a warehouse and distribution and marketing and promotion and making a viable business out of it. It's such a treacherous field that the only thing that saves these farmers, these business people from disaster, in our case has been, we step in and give them about $150,000 over a period of 2 years to survive the first few mistakes that we know they're going to make as business people. And also combat with, the poor infrastructure and terrible roads that they have to deal with to get started. What saves them in the end is farmer demand. Because yes, all farmers, as I said in the beginning, need good seed and want good seed. If you give them the chance to buy it, they will come and buy it. They might not be able to afford Bayer's latest, greatest, but they can afford a local seed company's price point. I talked a little bit about raising farmer awareness. What we found is eventually a sort of barefoot extension agent that's selected by the peers in their village is the best. The public extension agents are great. We love them wherever they exist, but they're too few. They don't have transport most of the time, so they can't move around efficiently. And so a local person like this, talking to a farmer, but not just talking, right? And no huge demos, researcher managed demos, never really did the job. Just hand her some seed. Just give her a sample and tell her, try this, see what you think. And there you can see that's the crop. This woman is her baseline. And that crop is completely chewed up by MSV, maize streak virus. And that is, again, a hybrid seed developed by Cal Road, the Kenya Agriculture, Livestock and Research Organization. It's resistant to that disease, and it has yield potential of up to 6 tons per hectare. So those village advisors we've found can reach up to 100, maybe 200 if it's a densely populated area with those small packs. They can host a demo on their farm. Farmers can come and do a Q&A about the new variety. But what you're trying to do is reduce the risk, right? Farmers can grow 50 to 100 gram samples of seed. It allows it to test the variety on their own land, in their own condition, at little or no risk. They're not going to want to run out and plant even 2 kg of seed the first year because they don't know the variety, and their existence depends on their harvest. So they can't absorb all that risk. But they can put a small plot, and we're talking about the area about this big that will be planted by 50 grams of maize from here to the wall and about 5 meters wide. It's enough. And if it doesn't work on her field, it's not going to be a major catastrophe for her. And then these people who become the first to purvey the new varieties often will eventually get the inclination, hey, farmers are asking where I can get the seed. I could start selling. And so they can often become agro dealers, which is, again, the last component in this value chain. Just somebody who sits in a shop all day, open to the public. It's private sector, but I often chuckle at thinking, we call it private like it's exclusive. And we call public research like it's open to the public. But it's really the reverse, isn't it? Right? Everybody can go into a private business, look at shoes, walk out, walk back in. That's public access. But a research station has a big gate up front, right? Usually with a watchman wants you to know exactly who's coming in the gate. That's private. That's exclusive. Private sector is actually all open access for the public, and that has been a blessing, as we establish seed supply systems across Africa. And then the role of women in managing these shops has been great. Women have become major suppliers, not just running their own shop, but running a whole chain of shops, becoming warehouse managers, uh, wholesalers with downlinks to people in villages. And yeah, it all works. Anyway, people ask sometimes, it's kind of a boring slide, I won't dwell on it, but what are the stages, where do you start? This is where we start. I just got back from Haiti. I'm doing some volunteer work down there to try to get a seed system going. And this is Haiti, no breeding, no private seed company in all of Haiti. Almost no agri-deal. I saw one, that was a positive, and very limited farmer awareness of improved seed. Farmers plot where we planted new varieties that I rented from him is growing a landrace like that original one that was undoubtedly brought over from Africa by slaves, brought there to cultivate sugarcane hundreds of years ago, half a millennium ago. He's still growing that same variety. It's just unbelievable to me that you can see that happen. Other examples in Africa are Chad, Central African Republic, Congo. There are many. But as you progress, varieties start to get released. Government might set up a variety release committee. Seed certification starts to be a thing. Seed companies are producing seed, and those are represented by these countries here: Togo, Congo, DR Congo, and Cote d'Ivoire. All the way up to, where you've got multiple stable national seed companies. By this time, the multinationals will have come in as well, and that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying they shouldn't, because they have excellent seed. Some of them have good varieties and hybrids adapted to Africa, but they're not going to produce bean seed. They're not going to produce sorghum seed. They're not going to produce rice seed, and the local guys will. The multinationals in Africa are really just tightly focused on hybrid maize seed, and mostly on the chance that it's eventually going to go GI. And they want to be there. And so their market share varies from not much to appreciable. But countries at this level, high level of farmer awareness, lots of agro dealers selling seed and fertilizer around, are given there. Uganda, Zambia, Kenya, Malawi, Tanzania. So as a result of this work, we can say a good portion of Africa is now on the road to being self-sufficient and even sometimes being major exporters of commodities. Tanzania now exports maize, hundreds of thousands of tons of maize per year into Congo. That's fantastic. They export soybeans to South Africa. They export beans to South Africa. Zambia is a major exporter as well, and also of seed. So those countries, we can say, we've done the job. But that leaves a huge part of the continent left behind. And these are some of the countries you don't even hear about, for 5 or 10 years at a time, Does anybody even know that there's a country called Guinea-Bissau? We work there. Anyway, I'll get to that. But Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, nobody has ever really done much in these countries. And so in 2019, I left Agra and decided for the rest of my career, I would devote to these left behind countries, the ones that people don't seem interested in trying to help. And what we found is that there's huge need. The trends are alarming. Over 50% absolute poverty. That's like $2 per day person. That's like, you can't buy medicine. You can't buy decent clothing. Your kids are going to have to go to a lousy school, if they're well enough to go to school at all, because we have over almost 40% average child malnutrition in these countries. And there are probably 40 million farm families living in countries where that's the reality. And the total population of those left behind countries is growing toward 400 million people. So we went out. Cornell University helped with this, helped us study the situation on the ground, met the leadership in those countries, and they by now had all gotten the clue that, seed is a thing and we're left behind. So we want to get going. And we found great partnership at government level. And then on the ground, we found that invariably there were people who also wanted to get involved with seed. And so we brought a little bit of funding and now have a plan for 15 countries, 5-year seed systems interventions whereafter we can bow out and let the local forces take over. And that plan is priced at about $95 million. So anybody meet any billionaires in the next couple of months, you can tell them Joe DeVries has a plan for them, and all I need is $95 million. So far, we've raised about 20 million, and we've worked in these countries. It's been a struggle, as I said, since USAID's demise, because they were funding us in a number of countries. You see all these USAID money, in the US State Department, they shut that down. But so it's really been the family foundations and a few governments, like the Canadian government and the Dutch government, that have taken over and kept us going. Okay, finally, the point I want to make, lessons learned along the way. You know, budgets, it really becomes a fight in the end. Where the money lands, as I said in the beginning, that classic funnel of hardly anything being left on the ground. You really need to spend money at the local level. And you need to train people locally, because they're the ones who are going to be doing this work for the rest of their lives. The second point I want to make is there's been recently some kind of enlightened development people who seem to be trying to slam the door on modern agricultural technologies for smallholder farmers. They don't think these farmers need modern seed or fertilizer, that this has all been a big mistake, and we need to stop it out there. These are people from developed countries. You may believe me or may not, but it exists, and it is a powerful negative force for this world. When somebody from an influential country with funding to travel to a country like Senegal goes out and says, no, you're better off with your land races. Whereas I have never seen a case where a farmer is better off cultivating for their lifetime or their children's lifetime a variety that can only yield them 1 ton per hectare. But the fact is, there are people out there who are fighting against agricultural development. I don't know what planet they come from, but anyway, they do a great disservice to everyone. You got to engage with private sector if you're interested in having impact at any level. Systems-based approaches are way better than time-bound projects and giveaways. You've got to work with government. Going to have to spend your time around tables and sitting outside important people's offices to get a time with them. Policies are important in the end. I see Phil Pardee down there, and he's probably waving or nodding his head. But it's really evidence on the ground, in my experience, rather than preaching or just theory that leads to real changes in policies. And we have required big changes to policies in all the countries I've mentioned. But it's only really after you show that the farmers are interested in this, that the leadership and the policymakers feel empowered or convinced that they need to make a change. This change is hard. Just a few images of the work on the ground, what it looks like in the different countries. Burundi, this was the first hybrid maize seed production plot ever grown in Burundi. There you can see the male pollen donor. Those are the emasculated female rows. We're going to make hybrid seed out of that, and that's the hybrid right there, the yellow 3-way hybrid. These are some of the inbred lines being multiplied by the National Ag Research Institute. That's a new bean variety. That's John McRobert teaching people how to do hybrid maize seed production. Wonderful man now working for Zamseed in Zambia, but did a couple of years with Seed Systems Group. Cote d'Ivoire, relatively well-off country, but no real seed system. We're intervening there on various crops. Djibouti's more of a desert country, but they do grow irrigated vegetables, and we got some funding from EFAD to go there. DR Congo, country of 100 million people, massive nutrition and hunger problems. We introduced the production of hybrid maize seed again there, and as well improved bean seed through several seed companies. One run by my good buddy Herman Mutabataba there, called AgriForce in Eastern Congo, but 5 or 6 others as well. Eritrea, kind of a totalitarian dictatorship where private sector is banned, believe it or not. But when we tested hybrid maize on the government's plots in Halhale, Eritrea, they said, you know, we've been importing hybrid maize seed from India every year at a huge cost. Are you saying we could produce our own? I'm saying, yes, you can. I was thinking at the same time, you don't have any seed companies, but they're making it work, believe it or not, so far through a public system for production of hybrid maize. And this guy, Negusi Abraha, is the guy working with these farmers like him to produce hybrid maize. It's pretty interesting. And we've gone down to the ground there. There's my buddy John, again, in a trial of some Simmet hybrids. And there's some of the new wheat varieties. I know you have a wheat breeding program here, and that's a representative sample of probably a Tila or crop wheat Simmet line versus the farmer's variety all around the outside. You see the difference there? It's amazing what the new seed is. And there's a full field of the seed being produced there, again, by government. So we have high hopes for Eritrea as well. Guinea-Bissau, just getting started there with some new rice seed from Africa Rice. Madagascar, a huge challenge. Country of 30 million people, one of the poorest in the world. Not really even part of Africa, more of an Asian society off the coast in the Indian Ocean out there, but left to its own, devices by the French for centuries. And now we're bringing in improved rice. Of course, it's mainly a rice growing country, but it's a great place to grow maize. And I think hybrid maize is definitely going to take off there. And so we're happy to have a program going on. Senegal, same deal, mainly focused on pearl millet and cowpea. Sierra Leone is mainly a rice growing country as well. Cowpea, but also cowpea and groundnut play major roles, and we've introduced new varieties of those. This is a cool photo. These are all farmers who've received, probably the first sample of improved rice seed in their lives, right? Almost the whole country produces landrace of rice and gets 1 ton per hectare. This is the new L19 sub 1. For anybody who knows rice breeding, that sub is a submergence resistance gene that's been moved into the background of the Nerika. Nerikas are wide crosses developed by Monty Jones, crossed between Glaberrima and Sativa species of rice. Amazing innovation that he introduced to the world back then. Now he's moved to the next world, so we thank him for his work here on Earth. Very exciting work in Sierra Leone. We have it going in Somalia, believe it or not, in and around, dodging the bullets and flying in and out of places that are reasonably safe. And there are a couple of seed companies. In fact, I think Paul Porter, seed from here, right? He's on the board of one of these companies. That's Filson Seed Company there, and that's hybrid seed production. And they're going great. And we've got great collaboration from the minister and that's myself and His Excellency, the Minister of Agriculture there at a seed conference that they hosted. Exciting stuff. South Sudan, pretty similar story. You can see the difference here. One farmer who hosted a small pack plot. You can see the productivity of that bean variety versus hers. Okay, I'm going to wind up and see if there's any questions. Oh, there's our report card. I always like to be accountable for the funds we've received. With the 20 million that we've gotten in commitments, we're now up around about 1 million farmers that we've reached through these small packs, through seed systems. Agra's impact and footprint was much better, much larger. We're just, fighting for funds for left behind countries. But we've at least produced almost 7,000 metric tons of certified seed. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I hope I didn't lose you. So anywhere along the line, and I'm really happy if there's any questions. Still got some minutes left. Or some critique or disagreement, I'm fine with that too.
Couple questions.
Okay, hi.
How do you know the work is done?
When you reach 30% adoption, I'm no longer interested in going back and reminding them the importance of seed at that point. They've got it. And you can, again, the public breeders have realized their job is not to just sit around and do trials. They're getting calls from seed companies. And they know they've got a job. Seed companies are fighting for market share and profits. Some of the seed companies we've worked with, I didn't spend enough time on that here. Probably should have put in some more. It's been miracles. I mean, really. Some of the Abdoulaye Sawadogo, who runs a company in Burkina Faso called Nafaso. And he started out his first year, we gave him a couple $1,000 and he produced, I think, 50 tons of maize seed or rice seed. He had been a tomato farmer previously. And he's annually producing over 6,000 tons of seed. You know, it's pretty amazing, all based on farmer demand. Many stories like that. So when those guys are in business and the politics, you know, the political economy has its own force. Abdoulaye Sawadogo rose from a humble tomato farmer in Bobo Dioulasso to being a friend of whatever minister comes in, because that minister needs him and his company. So he's become a very prominent person in the agricultural economy of his country. And the same is true for many other companies that were started on a whim and a prayer, but just got a little bit of coaching from, I have to say, my wife, Aileen O'Connor, who left her comfortable life in the Midwest running a seed company in this part of the region of the US called Channel Bio, and went to Africa and sat down and went to the field and looked at how these seed companies were doing their planting and coached them. And Dave Westfall was another coach that we sent out all around. He was a former Monsanto guy, Cargill guy originally, and then Monsanto. He went out all around Africa. Some real true believers who've really done the work out there. I just really appreciate their efforts. But once you've reached that point where you've got multiple seed companies fighting for their survival and yeah, to make a profit and dream of handing that company over to their children at some point. We've seen that happen. Paso Caba is a successful seed company in Mali, started by the wife of a maize breeder working for the national program. And she came to the US and he did a degree at University of Illinois or Missouri. And she looked around and said, DeKalb, they're selling seed. Why doesn't anybody sell seed in Mali? I think I'll try that when I get home. And she did. And now her daughter runs the company. She's, you know, Maimuna Coulibaly won the Africa Food Prize for her work in managing that seed company. So once you've got those people established, you can be assured other people are going to do it with their own money, right? There's spill in and Me Too forces that go to work once you've got a proof of concept around seed economy, seed markets. Yes, sir.
Thanks. Great talk.
Thank you.
With the increasing adoption of maize, do you see like there's a conflict between maize and other traditional crops?
Yeah.
So, and I have another question. In this chain that you just outlined, in your experience, what has been the role of the CG system?
Okay. Starting with your first of two tough questions. I would say it does concern me, because I have an appreciation for sorghum. I think it is, a better adapted crop overall. But I'm not going to be the one telling my kids who should be in school that they have to skip school to go scare birds, right? And I think millions of parents around Africa have made that same decision. And so sorghum has its own challenges. Maize comes bundled in a sheaf and still get bird damage in some cases, sometimes bad, but not near as vulnerable as sorghum. And yeah, the nutritional profile is very similar between the two crops. So I don't know, but I do worry long-term about loss of diversity. But I worry more about whether people are fed. That's our job today. We gotta help people see tomorrow and raise healthy children. So if the farmer wants to grow, or whatever crop the farmer wants to grow, I'm not gonna argue at all. I don't care. I just want that farm family to prosper. The role of the CG has been huge. CGIAR, the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research. They're our friends, sometimes they're our frenemies, because they absorb so much money. And they can be difficult to work with, and they don't do this. So in truth, they're a natural partner, but it becomes a bit of a tussle over who gets the resources. They're a very prominent body of organizations, favorites of donors, and are supported handsomely. This work gets a fraction of, remember my funnel? This is where we should all be, I would say 70% of people at this point should be focused on this challenge. We could finish it by, what was this UN development goal? Feeding the world by 2030? It's too late now, okay? But if you push that back by 2035 and we got busy doing this work, we could actually achieve that. Food security by 2035. It's just, where the money ends up. And I don't regret that the CG is funded. I was saying to Rex and Sarah this morning, you got to hand it to them. I needed seed to go to Haiti. I wrote to my friends at CIMMYT and dealt with the USDA import requirements. And 5 weeks later, I had a package of maize, open pollinated varieties and hybrids sitting on my doorstep. I asked the same thing of SIA, and they've sent me 13 pounds of improved bean seed. So definitely huge and super important institutions. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How are the farmers funding infrastructure to store?
Well, we don't ask farmers to store seed. We think the seed storage is better left up to a seed company with a warehouse where they can maintain it. But if a farmer wants to store seed, the PICS bag is a great technology. You know about Purdue improved cowpea storage bags, PICS? It's a 3-layer bag, and it'll hold about 100 kg. It's an enormous bag, this wide, this tall. But basically, whatever grain you put in there, whether it's seed or grain, if you eliminate as much of the air as possible and put the 3 layers in place and just tie it off with a zip tie or another wraparound cord at the top, all the insects inside there will asphyxiate and provide it and stop eating the grain. Yeah, they'll die. But of course, it has to be at storable moisture. You have to reduce the moisture. That's mainly, sun drying. So the farmers have ways, and it's a good problem to have for a farmer, right? If they've got something to store longer term until they get the price they want. So PICS bags are wonderful. And it's not just Purdue that's producing them anymore. They have a lot of copycat, producers of those 3-layer bags in Africa and around the world now. There's a great bit of research done by Larry Murdoch at Purdue and Lori Kitsch. Phil.
Okay, good to see you again. I was
Thanks.
reflecting to Rex, I think it's probably 2 decades. Since
Yeah, it's been a while.
Chat, yeah. You mentioned the CG where both have spent some time and you mentioned you've got a $90 million bet, right?
Mhm.
And failing to really fund it strategically, where all the logic suggests this systems and value chain approach that is important. And so it's not just the amount of money, it's the form of funding that goes into this space, right? Because what you're doing requires a lot of agility and movement and degrees of freedom operate. The CG, when I worked for it, used to have that too. And they not only have suffered a 27% budget cut in the last 5 years, and
Yeah.
that was prior to the $100+ million they lost from USAID.
Mm.
But the form of their funding has changed. They're completely project funded and
Yeah.
short terms. So you've worked on both sides of,
Mhm.
of this equation. Why is there a failure amongst the sort of key players in this market, in terms of the philanthropy market, but also on the government side, to fail to take this more strategic sort of 5, 10, 15 year view and hear the funding around those, the realities are actually on the ground as opposed to this 3 funding cycle.
Yeah.
I struggle with this problem myself.
Yeah. Bill Gates has got enough money to do it all
Right.
by himself, We wouldn't even need Buffett.
And that Hub Force project, we interacted with you. I remember going into the Gates Foundation, the
Yeah.
first project that they had funded me,
Uh,
and saying, don't put people in states that are really don't
Yeah.
go down a project route, think
Yeah.
strategically.
Yeah.
But,
Some people say there's a silver bullet mentality there that they suffer from, but then again, I was maybe their second, major initiative back in the day. They kind of got colonized by a bunch of CG people who wanted all the money to go to the CGIAR and were pretty successful with it. I understand there's some pushback nowadays from on top, so there may be trend to change. We're actually going to be funded to promote BT cowpea varieties in Ghana by the Gates Foundation. So we still have hope that they'll come on board again in a big way. And I'd love to have a 10-minute talk with Bill Gates if I could get near him. But other people have more money. What's Elon Musk doing with all his billions? What does Larry Ellison do with his money? What I find is that the women, former spouses of some of these donors, are doing more, to change the world in a practical way than the original billionaires. So I think we need to keep our eye on that. There was kind of another issue there. Well, governments as well, in our own government, this US government needs to be reminded that it has a legacy to uphold. And we've heard some positive rumors or rumblings, not rumors. They've actually published a call for proposals for new innovation labs to be run by the State Department. So there's some hope there, and we hope to get some of that money. Yeah. In fact, I believe we will. Yes, Rex.
I was wondering if you have any estimate of what number or percentage of publicly developed varieties in Africa have ever made it to a farmer's field?
Yeah, I will put it by my scientific swag guess at around definitely less than 20%. Yeah. And not all of them should, but if we couldn't make half of them get into production, I would say we're not succeeding with that challenge. Yeah. So, maybe we need to work on branding this methodology. And if anybody has a suggestion, I'm not good with names. So if there's a way we could present this and take it to the powers that be with a more marketable tag, I'd be open to that. We call it seed systems, but I know it's kind of a dense terminology. Probably should come up with something better. And maybe we need to promote it just more. That's why I'm here. And I'll continue to go around the country and wherever called on. I was in Netherlands not too long ago, giving a similar presentation, and I'd love to, again, talk to our government about it. So, yeah, we have a duty, you know, as agronomists. Otherwise, I don't see how we can look at ourselves in the mirror, you know, and say we're you know, making good on our opportunity to have employment as breeders or agronomists and serving that purpose. Our purpose is the farmer. They say Norman Borlaug on his deathbed said, "Take it to the farm," for his last words. And I believe that, you know, wholeheartedly. You know, he was someone who had been confronted with the reality, and he never could operate any other way. Yeah. Yes, yeah, I think, anyway, go ahead. We'll do both.
What's the IP system look like in those different countries of Africa?
It's really not a problem. Any company that has fear of losing its germplasm to piracy on the ground, probably it's not their market, you know? If you're gonna be that picky or precious about what you got, you know, yeah, you might not wanna come to Africa, but there's alternatives, like I've been saying, you know, the CG doesn't protect its intellectual property. You sign an MTA, nobody's ever asked me later on audited whether I respected that MTA. I sign them all the time. And then we do what we want. So, and, you know, so you can use public material and, you know, through local private entrepreneurs who get it to farmers. I wouldn't say it's a problem. But there are countries who lack a formal IP system, right? And that's true. But it's not something that needs to be put in place before we can have success with agriculture. I think that's my point. Yes.
I guess kind of two things. First, yeah, thanks for championing the message of the solution most likely exists. We just need to get it distributed, deployed. So my work in Tanzania really was that. Every government official was shocked that the tool was there. They just didn't know about it, and nobody was giving money to get it distributed to people. And then same with private industry. They were like, let's focus on breeding rather than the foundational elements that makes the variety successful. But to step out of your wheelhouse a little, you focused on when there's that hunger need, poverty need, and caloric need. For especially East Africa, where they push through a lot of that, still with many challenges. From your perspective, how can they build a diverse cropping system now with complementary crops and fund the breeding that needs to come in? It'll be quicker now, new technologies, but it still needs some breeding.
Yeah.
And especially the seed system and development work.
It's a great question. And it has a bit of a head scratching answer, I think, but bear with me. If you're a mother of 5 or 6 children and you're growing a landrace of a cereal crop, there's not a lot of room on your farm for diversity. Everything you plant is ground you plowed yourself with a hoe. And the main thing you have to do is keep those kids' bellies full throughout the year. If your variety is yielding you 1 ton per hectare, you don't have room for tomatoes. You don't even have time. But we've seen time and again, over and over, when farmers get access to a higher yielding variety, bear with me, they don't increase the size of their maize crop because they're not really competitive yet as export market or a formal grain trading system. But they can feed their farm on less than half of the land they were using they could feed their family with less than half the land they were using to feed their family before. Now they do have room for a few fruit trees, for vegetables, for beans, for cowpea, for pigeon pea. And so increasing the productivity of the main staple crop leads to diversification on farm. It's not a pie in the sky theory. It plays out in reality. And so my wife tells a story of a woman she was talking to in Ethiopia. And she'd made the same, erroneous assumptions. She said, wow, so now you've had the experience of growing this BH 540 hybrid maize variety. I suppose you're going to grow more next year. And the woman looked at her and said, no, I'm going to grow less. I'm going to grow vegetables. Yeah, I'm going to grow this variety, but I'm going to also start growing some cash crops and vegetables. So it was an interesting insight into the economic analysis done by a farmer locally. Was there another question? Yeah, I'm interested in your experience in Tanzania. Fascinating country.
All right, we're out of time for questions now, but the conversation can continue. There are snacks and coffee in the back for the
Oh,
next
yeah.
half hour and give Joe a break, but let's all give him a round of applause.
Thank you for listening.